Alrighty, it is 9, so we'll go ahead and get started. Today we are going to finish this lecture, and then we have an activity that we will do. Marking off everybody who is not here. Okay. Yep. Looks like a couple other people may have signed on here. Alrighty, and I want to just gently remind folks on Zoom that the Zoom is for when you're sick or when there's something in your way of getting to class. I know some of you have struggled with rides, things like that, or if you're an athlete and you're traveling. But I feel like folks are just using it so they don't have to get out of bed and come, and I ask that you not abuse it. So that we can keep it as an option for everybody. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and switch our captions up here. Alrighty, so if y'all remember at the end of class on Wednesday, we were talking about sexual harassment. And if you recall, it's pretty frequent, unfortunately, and it has a lot of consequences like anger, reduced self-esteem, depression, anxiety, lowered productivity, and decreased commitment to the job and the employer. So how do we combat it then? Well, especially given all these things I just said, right, about how it could be detrimental not only to the individual, but to the employer should prioritize this. And in particular, organizations should promote norms that are intolerant of sexual harassment. Workers should be educated about recognizing sexual harassment. And organizations should have policies that expressly forbid harassment and grievous procedures to handle allegations of harassment. So not only should companies have these policies in place, but as I mentioned on Wednesday, like this is fully illegal, right? It's part of Title IX for students. I believe it's part of Title VII for employees. And those are about equity. And the argument has been made, you can't experience equity if you are experiencing harassment, right? If you're being harassed, it's not an equal experience. So organizations should essentially just be intolerant. See something, say something. If anyone does say anything, cracking down right away, not brushing it off, things along those lines. Obviously, part of harassment and some of the other stuff we've been talking about is thinking about health and wellness at work. So, job stress, we know that a lot of people experience, right? So we know that this is related to a whole host of factors like mental health, physical health, things along those lines. For role conflict is when you're conflicting between two roles, and I'm just realizing I did go over this slide on Wednesdays. I'm gonna skip ahead. Sorry for the little bit of repetition. There we go. This is the slide that we were going to start with today. Alrighty. So how do you choose a career? How do you maybe choose to change your career, right? Well, there's a couple different models of how to choose your career. One of those is Holland's person environment fit model. And career choice is related to 6 stable personal orientation. Some people call these personality types. Since they're so specific to career, I think a lot of people would argue that these are instead like personality or personal orientations. In addition, jobs can be classified into 6 work environments. And people are going to be most satisfied with the job, so happy in their job experience, successful, so actually productive in the job experience, and stable, so staying in one job over time, when they choose work environments that fit their personal orientations. So what are these personal orientations? Realistic people are people who are good at hands-on stuff, mechanical skills, and sometimes they're weak in social skills. These are folks who do really well in fields like engineering, farming, even something as hands-on as like being an auto mechanic. These are the folks that you meet in those careers who may just be like, answer in 1 or 2 words, right? Or just sort of like lay things out there, no sugarcoating, right? But they're really good at their job and they get it done. Investigative people enjoy logical analysis, and they prefer like abstract ideas over people. These folks do really well in research type careers. So whether that's in like biomedicine or, more like book type research, like history, philosophy. And they also are folks who are really good at being like librarians, although librarians do need people skills for sure. Artistic people need outlets for their emotional expression. They're going to seek careers in art, music, or drama. So even if they're not the one creating the art, they'll try to work within those fields. So for example, here at Wesleyan, we now have a master's degree in arts management. That's something that folks go into if they're not interested in like being the person who's creating the art. Social people prefer to interact with other people. These folks are drawn to what are called the helping professions. These are things like teaching, being a therapist, being a nurse, things along those lines. Enterprising people are self-confident and sociable. They have good leadership skills, very persuasive in how they talk. These are folks who excel in sales, management, or might strike it out on their own and be entrepreneurs. Conventional people are conforming and orderly. They prefer really structured work environments. So these are folks who might do really well in like a business cubicle setting, right? Where they're like, okay, here are what my tasks for the day. I got to get them done. People are going to tell me what to do. And I think a lot of people think like conventional is bad, right? Oh, you're not thinking for yourself, whatever. No, it just means that you prefer not to be the leader, right? And we need lots of conventional people in our day-to-day lives. Alrighty. There's also Super's developmental model. So this is a different model to Holland's model. And it focuses on the development of one's occupational status over time. So whereas Holland is like, you're a certain type of person, you're going to be matched to a certain type of work environment, Super says this is going to continue to change and grow and adapt over time throughout your career. So in the growth stage, this is when you're a kid. This is when you sort of like fantasize about your ideal job. I'm going to be an astronaut ballerina when I grow up, right? Like 2 of the hardest jobs to get into. Kids have a lot of fun with this. They're not thinking about like what are the skills needed to do a certain job, right? They're just like, that job looks fun. That's what I want to do. The exploration stage is where in your youth, maybe as a high schooler, but certainly as a college student, you really start to consider different careers, think about the implications of going into different careers. What coursework do I need to do to get into a certain career? Things along those lines. Then there's the establishment stage, and this is where you commit to a career and learn to function effectively within that career. So you kind of like learn the culture of that career, right? You learn the specific skills you need to be part of that career. The maintenance stage is around midlife. And this is where the focus is on just kind of like keeping on. You've learned all the skills you need, right? So now you're just going to keep plugging away. You want to retain any achieved status you've gotten, and then protecting security, power, staying up to date on what you need to maintain your job. And then the decline stage is where your work is going to actively decrease as retirement approaches. And sometimes this is literal. So for example, a lot of companies, including Virginia Wesleyan, have step down programs. So like our faculty can either over the course of 1 year or stretch it out over 2 years, start stepping down their work, and they teach fewer and fewer classes, they have fewer and fewer responsibilities. It helps the university by kind of like giving us a buffer while we hire someone new. And then it also helps the employee because they maintain like full-time employment status and benefits until they can get to that with like Social Security, their retirement, things like that. So retirement brings the occupational cycle to an end. One of the things I'll say about Super's model in particular is I think it needs to be updated, right? For folks of your generation and even my generation, it isn't linear like this, right? A lot of people will switch jobs pretty consistently in order to try, like, unfortunately, with the way companies have sort of restructured and downsized, oftentimes the only way that you can get a raise, promotion is to switch companies, sometimes even switch careers, right? And so this doesn't exactly match for everybody. Also, the decline and the retirement stage are lovely ideas, but unfortunately, there are a lot of folks who are with it's just not realistic, right? If you are someone whose job doesn't offer retirement benefits, or you own your own very small business, like a bodega, say, you are probably working until you die, right? Because you just need to. The other thing that can happen after career ends is people can just get bored, right? And some people fulfill this by retiring and by volunteering. And some people fulfill this by traveling, but some people will just go out and get another job. My mother did this. She's retired and just was like, I hate sitting around at home. And so now she has a different job. It's not a second career, but it's certainly she's out there working, right? And I think a lot of retirees will do something like that. My next door neighbor is retired, but he loves to golf. And our neighborhood is on a golf course, so he works for the golf club a couple days a week so that he can golf for free, basically. So like, whatever works for you. And so we know that the world of work is changing, and there are some trends that have been changing. The biggest one is technology, right? It's changed the nature of work, and particularly after sort of the 2020, 2021 era, we realize now that like a lot of meetings can be done via video conference, right? We don't have to always travel someplace else to meet with folks. That saves companies a lot of money on travel. Also, just technology is always changing. In my capstone course the other day, we were talking about the ethics of AI, right? And like, what are the implications of AI for work going forward, for like the field of psychology going forward? Are there going to be therapy chatbots, and how good are they going to be, right? Things like that. So you need to like keep up, change, adapt, and get additional training. And sometimes your work will provide it, and sometimes you've got to seek it out yourself. So for example, early in my time here at Wesleyan, I realized the statistical methods I'd been taught just a couple years before in grad school were now outdated. So Wesleyan paid for me to go to a week-long statistics training so that I could actually like publish my data. New work attitudes are likely required. Workers have to take a more active role to prove they're valuable in order to attain job security. Also, just like, I don't know if you all have had these type of conversations, but there's a lot of folks from older generations who are like, what do you mean? You just walk into the company and you give them your resume and you get a job. You're like, no, that's not how anything works now, right? So sort of thinking about like how hiring works differently. Again, as I just mentioned, You know, maybe in order to get the job you want, the pay you want, you've got to switch companies, which again, like back in the day, everyone just sort of like stayed where they were their whole careers. So lifelong learning, as I just talked about with training, becomes very necessary. Skills become obsolete every 10 to 15 years, and technology is probably much more quickly, right? And so you have to figure out, how do I do that? One of the things Wesleyan has done is we've partnered with the city of Virginia Beach, and they've given us a grant to provide free lifelong learning training to folks in the workforce. So there are free online classes folks can take. We sometimes offer classes in person over in Clark Hall from our business department, to again, just like as a service to the community, let's help people stay on top of things, get jobs, keep jobs. We also know that independent workers are increasing. So people downsizing companies, right? Mergers and then downsizing, outsourcing to other companies creates more what my notes call free agents. Essentially, there are a lot more folks who are like freelancers, right? Consultants who can charge a lot of money to perform tasks that companies no longer have in-house people to do, right? So some places might hire a different firm to like manage their finances because they no longer have people in-house who do that. Or like a lot of people have hired their own social media managers, but some people are now outsourcing that to like freelancers or companies that specifically focus in on that. My national organization that I belong to had some concerns about diversity and representation, and they had a consulting firm come in and do a really large scale assessment and give recommendations as a result of that. We also know, again, even more so in the past few years, that the boundaries between work and home are blurring because of technology. Sometimes this is really good, right? Some people really like sort of the work from home attitude or an option, but sometimes this means that your boss is going to text you at 10 at night and expect a response, right? And like, that's not cool. So people are learning to set boundaries in ways that work for them. They think that the highest job growth will continue to occur in the professional and service occupations. And to be perfectly honest, there are probably jobs that will exist that we don't even like know or understand yet, right? There's probably like an AI manager job down the road, something like that, right? So these are, again, old, but from what I've looked at, they haven't really changed that much. Of like, these are the occupations that are going to have a lot of growth. So there are things like nursing, teaching. Unfortunately, there's a lot of openings in, because during the pandemic, a lot of teachers who were trying to like teach kids over Zoom, right, just got really burned out. And so like, you all may know folks as well, like I know people who were teachers and just sort of like gave up. Decided to step back after the pandemic, and so there are a lot of openings there. Sales reps, you know, we still do need people to talk to other people to sell things. Truck drivers, administrative assistants. A lot of times folks who used to just like answer phones and emails are now doing like really comprehensive jobs that have a lot of responsibility. Accountants, auditors, maintenance and repair workers. I mean, if you just like look around our campus, right, there's a lot of stuff that could use some tweaking. First line supervisors or managers of office and administration support workers, carpenters. I think all of the trades. I know there have been some articles recently in the Virginian Pilot about like how we need more housing, particularly in our area, right? And in order to do that, you need carpenters, electricians, construction workers, plumbers, right? Oftentimes these folks in the trades make more than people with PhDs do, because those skills are so valuable, right? Retail sales workers, supervisors, automotive service technicians and mechanics, and in particular, ones who have updated knowledge about like electric and hybrid vehicles. Nurses, kind of the same thing here. Engineers, computer software engineers. Law enforcement continues to be an area where I think especially with the political climate, we're seeing fewer people wanting to go into it. Physicians, surgeons, always going to be needed. And then the other thing I would say related to this is, you know, it might not be like a top, whatever this list is, career, but unfortunately, if you're thinking you want to go into like therapy or counseling, we're always going to need folks in that area. Unfortunately, folks are always going to have mental health issues, and unfortunately, it's sometimes even more in recent years. So I was assistant director of our training clinic when I was in grad school in the year 2008, 2009. And that's when like the financial crisis, the housing bubble, all that stuff started happening. And we had like our wait list kept growing and growing for people wanting therapy. All the stuff that's happened since then, right? Like 15 years since then has not made it better, right? The pandemic has increased demand for mental health care coverage. Vets who have served in Iraq, Afghanistan, some of these other conflicts, right? Suffering with PTSD, depression, substance use issues. So we need people in the mental health field. Now, what about education and earnings? So earnings are generally tied to the level of education, but like I said, there are some big exceptions, including like the skilled trades. However, many college grads are what we call underemployed. So they are settling for a job that doesn't fully utilize their skills, abilities, and training. So, you know, I think this is getting a little better with job growth in the past, maybe only like 2-3 years. But I have had brilliant psych grads who end up like a manager at Kroger. Is that a bad job? No. Right? Is there any shame in that? No, but it's probably not what they want to be doing, right? And it's not distinctly within their career. So, and that's more likely if their college level skills like reading, writing, and quantitative skills are poor. If you have good skills in especially communication, both written and oral, quantitative skills, critical thinking skills, Fortune 500 companies love liberal arts majors because they have those abilities and that's what they're looking for. So again, a little bit of outdated data. This is from 2006, but does sort of show you that generally there's a trend over time that you make more money. Yes, unfortunately, there are still differences in pay based on gender. And then this is intersectional, right? So it's also going to depend on things like your race. Whether you are overweight or not actually determines your salary. Whether you're a member of other minoritized groups, like a member of LGBTQ plus community. So for example, people often cite like the pay gap between men and women as being like, women make 77 cents on the dollar for what men make. But if you look at it by race, it totally changes. So for example, I think it is Latinx women actually make something on the order of like 54 or 56 cents on the dollar that a white man makes. So we have a long way to go in terms of pay equity in our country. Alrighty, so I do have a little activity for us today. So you can go ahead, if you're following on the slides, and just click the link. Otherwise, I made a tiny URL so it's easy to get to. So this is a Google Doc. And what you'll see, and actually hang on, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and copy the link at the top of the worksheet, and then I can click into it and show y'all. There we go. So what this looks like. So what you're going to do is you don't have to put your name anywhere on here, but you're going to answer each question. There we go. And make this a color y'all can see. There. Okay. answer each question, and just type right in the sheet. And again, you don't have to put your name. This is just about where you're at right now. And I know some of you are first years, and so you're not quite sure. That's okay. Give your best guess. So what career do you want to have after you graduate? What changes do you think an IO psychologist could make to that working environment for that job to improve conditions for workers? Oh, hang on just a sec. Sometimes answers from the last time I used this end up still there. And then what management style or overall approach do you think is typically used in the field, and what would be best? So this is like the theory X versus theory Y, things along those lines, the different types of managers. So you can look through your notes for that. So I want everybody on Zoom and my 2 folks in person to go ahead and answer each of these right on the sheet. I'll give you all a few minutes to do that, and then we'll talk about the answers together. While y'all are working on that, I'll see who else signed on. So yeah, I should see 18 different responses for each question. While y'all are doing that, I'm just gonna run across the hall and grab some water. If someone did the assignment earlier this week, you can just screen share with me, or share the Google Doc or email it to me. Here is the link for folks in Zoom. You can just click, oops, hang on just a sec. I sent it just to Jasmine. Let me send it to everybody. So folks in Zoom can just click that link. Or you can type in this tiny URL and that'll get you there too, if you want to pull it up on your phone or something like that. I will be right back. I'm gonna go grab my water. It is Thursday. What's that? Nope, nope, you could just type right on here. and then I'm just gonna read everybody's answer, so you're.
got that copy already set in there to type the URL.
Oh, okay, yeah, then you can just email it to me, that's fine. Cool. And y'all, I am just gonna try to make it a little easier and bold the questions, because this is so fantastic that a lot of folks are putting stuff in, but then that makes it harder to find the questions sometimes, so there we go. All right. Yeah, and if y'all are finished, you can just sort of chill for a couple minutes, and then I will talk through everybody's answers in a minute or three. Yeah, make sure everybody answers all three questions. Again, I'm loving that I'm seeing lots of answers, but I'm not seeing 18 answers. So folks on Zoom, make sure you're waking up and paying attention and actually participating. The link for this document is in the chat. All right, I'm loving seeing new people typing in the document. Folks who are done, you can just chill for a sec if you want to review your notes. And once everybody's done typing, I will read through all the answers. Hopefully this won't screw up anybody too much, but what I'm gonna do is put each question on a different page. And that'll make it a little easier to keep them separate. I love how Google arbitrarily assigns animals to folks who aren't logged in. So right now we have anonymous coyote typing. I believe there's an anonymous lizard, anonymous iguana, anonymous grizzly bear. Gotta love it. All right, so I'll give it like another 2-3 minutes and then we will go ahead and read through these together. While y'all are doing that, I'm just gonna pull up my lecture for my next class. That's alrighty, so I'm gonna start at the top. If you're still typing on question 2 or 3, that's cool. We will get down there. And you will be able to still access the sheet from the same link. I'll leave this year's answers in if you want to refer back to them later. Oh, got something in the chat. Okay, great. And some people have emailed me their answers, which works too. All right, so what career would you like to do after you graduate? We've got someone who wants to be in the field of law, preferably a lawyer helping convicted felons, someone who's thinking sports psychology or something within the sports management field. A couple folks who are thinking physical therapy. I see at least 3 on here, 4 it looks like. That's great. That is an awesome field to get into, kind of combines science and sports, and there's obviously an element of psychology helping people overcome injuries. We've got a couple folks looking into being clinical or counseling psychologists, a child psychologist in particular. Great, we always need more folks doing that. Art therapy, fantastic. If you're interested in art therapy and you're going to major in psych, let me know, or even minor, because I actually have an internship that I've worked with the EVMS art therapy program on. Nursing, great field, tough field, but great field. A lot of these are tough fields. Rec therapists, yeah, definitely. We need more rec therapists, and I love that you want to work for the VA. Our veterans certainly need that. Another rec therapist. I get a lot of rec therapy, psych, either double majors or major minors. They go together really, really well. Excellent. I love the spread. And again, I'm super biased, obviously, since I teach psychology, but psychology can be really helpful in a lot of these fields, if not all. So what changes might an IO psychologist make to the working environment for that job to improve conditions for workers? For art therapy, multiple safe art supplies and or physical, some sort of artistic expression using the body activities for people is crucial. Yeah, so one of the things EVMS does is they'll do workshops on physical things. They work a lot with Norfolk Street Choir. So we're also thinking like performing arts as well. For physical therapists, psychologists could improve the working conditions because they pay attention not only to the person doing PT, but the actual physical therapist, and have a different look on approaches to their interactions. Yeah, I think that that's really important, right? Is to think about the interaction between the two, between the person who's the patient and the person who's the therapist, right? You know, maybe a human factors type IO psychologist could look at like, are the techniques working in the way we want them to, or what's a better way to teach those techniques? Making the building look nice and inviting. I realized I accidentally skipped over that one, but yeah, that's so important. It sounds so silly in some ways, but like, for example, let's say you were doing therapy or counseling and you were in a room like our classroom and group. It's not very conducive to someone feeling like comfortable sitting down one-on-one, opening up, right? Or like one of my professors in grad school used to joke, like, you can't do therapy in a parking lot, right? And again, it seems so silly and so obvious, but we have to think about the implications. Like, what should your office look like for each type of job, and how does it convey different things, right? So someone said you want to be a lawyer. the one time I've interacted quite a bit with the law office was I was deposed in a case. And this law office was at like the top story of a building downtown. Everything was made for grandeur and honestly to be intimidating, right? And so like that's a very different vibe than if you're opening like a clinic to have clients come in. In my specific law firm, I think having this type of psychologist available would help make sure we get the type of attention of accommodations we need to work in the specific environment. Yeah, that's really important, right? Like not only the clients you're working with as a lawyer, do they understand what you're saying? But what if the lawyers themselves need some sort of accommodations, right? What if they have a physical disability or a learning difference, something along those lines? Rec therapy, making sure you have people with similar qualities. Yeah, sometimes in general, that can make a difference in any workplace, right? Is to try to have people with similar qualities, similar philosophies, right? And you don't want everybody to be clones of each other, obviously, but having people who will be able to work well together is then going to benefit the folks you're trying to help. For sports psych, maybe putting clients with certain therapists that have similarities and personality to make the client feel more comfortable. Yeah, and sometimes it's as simple as demographic match, right? Wanting to have someone who's the same gender or race or around the same age as you, right? Can be really important as well. Or like if you're doing sports psych, knowing that person has a background in athletics, right? That can make a big difference sometimes as well. Improving morale of psychologists and make sure everyone gets equal pay. Huge, 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 no matter the setting. For a child psychologist and IO psychologist would make sure the psychologists are taken care of and would help that the clients are getting the proper treatment. Yeah. So making sure, you're hiring good people that they're taking care of so they want to stay around and have the capabilities to provide the services needed, right? So they're not burned out, they're not feeling overwhelmed. For sport-specific physical therapy, match up patients with therapists familiar to that sport. Yeah, that's what I was kind of mentioning, right? They feel more comfortable and hopeful for a successful recovery. Also, just like, I love the psychological aspect of that, but just having a physical therapist who is more knowledgeable in specific injuries can be really important, right? So like if you tear your ACL, you don't want to go to a physical therapist who's never worked with someone who tore their ACL before, right? And so if you're in a sport that like there's a lot of ACL tears, you want someone who knows what they're doing. To help clinical and counseling psychologists, putting mental health resources for employees. Yeah, so important, right? Thinking about the fact that like you're listening to people's problems all day. My supervisor at the VA, when I was on my residency, she told us that like at one point in her career, she got what's called secondary traumatization. So she works with so many clients with PTSD. She started getting symptoms of PTSD. So you want to make sure those folks have mental health resources. More fun and physical activities that kids will like. Nursing, watch and see how different people are and find something to help them make more comfortable. Yeah, and I think for nursing, thinking about like the setup of the nurses station, the setup of the equipment to make it accessible, right? I think that's a fact that like IV poles are often like this tall, right? But not all, but I've known quite a lot of nurses who are this tall, right? Can they reach the IV to help their patient, right? And making rooms for people who don't want to be around others. Yes, that's such a good point, that there are fields people can excel in, even within the mental health field, where you don't have to be around other people. Maybe you would be the person in IT for the VA, right? Or maybe you would be the person kind of in the background helping design new physical therapy equipment or strategies, methods. What management style or overall approach do you think is typically used and which would be best? For law firm theory, why would be best? Because it trusts employees to do their job, having an opportunity for recognition and promotion. Yeah, so a lot of law firms, especially now, do have this, where like you start off as, I believe they call it an associate, but you have the ability to work your way up to become a partner in the firm, which means like you have a stake in the firm, you make more money, things like that. Yeah, and then they'd be super motivated to do their best. For managing child psychologists, you would want supportive, transformational, and client-centered leadership to foster a collaborative growth-oriented environment that prioritizes the child's well-being and ethical care. Yeah, love that. Values-driven, making sure that from day one, you are thinking about the people we serve, right? And everyone gets on the same page about that, down to the person who does the janitorial work, right, for your company. Making sure they know not to like interrupt sessions, things along those lines, right? For sports psychology, theory Y would probably be best because it allows the therapist and client to be creative in finding solutions and coping skills. Yeah, and let's imagine you work for a larger sports psych firm. Theory Y would also be good so that the therapist felt comfortable trying things that worked for their clients. For physical therapy, we would want a method that prioritizes collaboration for sure, right? Not only among the physical therapists, but you want to be collaborating with that person's physician. You know, if there's someone who is an athlete, working with their coach, right? Things along those lines. For sports-specific physical therapy, strengths-based management, because it identifies workers' strengths and weaknesses, giving insight onto which patient should be with which therapist for their recovery to be fast and successful. Yeah, that match is so important within talk therapy, but I'm sure it's very similar for physical therapy. Something around the order of 40% of how well someone does in therapy is accounted for by things like therapist-client working relationship, right? So if you don't feel like you can work with that person, you're not going to get better. Japanese style is typically used in art therapy field because they take risks and are open to trying new things to solve a problem. Value forming relationships is important for clients in this field for sure, right? So relationships with other art therapists, relationships with companies. I know EVMS's art therapy program, like they train their folks so well that their folks have often been able to like go out into the community and make an argument that like your company should have an art therapist. They would be really helpful. And those people will like create a position for them. Sports psychology theory Y, because it shows how they can work together for the best possible solutions. Totally. Clinical psych, something that involves the client and their collaboration to find a solution. Physical therapy, strength-based activities to help with certain muscle groups. And then rec therapy, being open-minded, not judging, strength-based management. Yeah, excellent job, everybody. Thanks for participating on Zoom. I appreciate that. And of course, to my two folks in person, thank you for being here. Very much appreciate that. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll start a new chapter on Monday.